Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Kuf Aleph. We're going to start at the top of our page. We're going to finish our chapter, and we'll move on to the next parak, nearing the end. Okay, Hayu Shnehem kohanim. We're in the middle of this case where we were discussing that if we have a woman who gets married within 3 months of having been married to somebody before, then what we said was that we have an issue with the status of the child. So we're in the middle, and it's a little bit strange here. We're in the middle of discussing the case where there were two kohanim, meaning both fathers were kohanim, so the person is definitely a kohen. However, the case that they're discussing right now could have been relevant, the issue they're discussing could have been relevant also for the first case where it's Safek Israel, Safek Kohen. It doesn't really make a difference. What happens in this case is, and this is the line in the Mishnah, Patur al makato v'kilato shel zeh v'shel zeh. According to our Mishnah, is exempt for hitting or cursing one or the other. Why? Because this is what we already discussed this, hatra'at safek. It's a warning. One is not allowed to hit or curse one's parents. If one does, liable the death penalty. Now, if this person does it, so each time, in order to get punished, you have to be warned. Do you know that if you do this, it's forbidden and you'll get this punishment? And he says, yes, I know, and I don't care. So in this case, he could say, well, I don't know for sure because maybe he's not my father. Comes up the Gemara or the Beit Av actually that we're going to quote with a classic Gemara situation. Okay, here goes. Tana Rabbanan, top of Kuf Aleph. Hikazeh v'chazar v'hikazeh. Kilel zeh v'chazar v'kilel zeh. What if he cursed them both one right after the other? And now, so the warning, right? You get warned at 7:50. At 7:51, you curse one father. At 7:52, you curse the other father. So your warning was, if one of these people is your father, right? It's not exactly a definite warning, but it is pretty much a definite warning because in the end, you definitely cursed your father. So the question is, you're liable for that. Is that considered a definitive warning? So according to the first opinion of the Beit Av, we're going to actually see three opinions about this. If you did this, or kilel shnehem bebat achat, in one word, like let's say one sentence, you curse both of them. I curse both of you. Okay. Now, in that case, all the more so, you clearly cursed one of them. You did it right. You clearly cursed your father. You did it at the same time, immediately after the warning. So, according to this, so kilel shnehem bebat achat or hikash shnehem bebat achat, you either curse them or hit them. Chayav. Tanakama says all those situations you're liable. Okay, because clearly this is similar. By the way, we saw this famous case of Shnei Shvilim. You're walking somewhere and there's Tumah in one, and the question is, did you definitely walk through the Tumah? But each time you walked, it's not so clear, right? So anyway, it's another similar situation. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, bevat achat chayav, b'zeh achar zeh patur. Rabbi Yehuda says, if it was all done at once, then you would be chayav. If you did it in the same mouthful, but if you did, or one slap, and you slap both of them. But bezeh achar zeh patur. If it's one after the other, that's already considered hatra'at safek because you need to be warned exactly right before you do it. And here there was an action potentially in between you and when you actually did it because you cursed one, maybe he wasn't your father, and then you cursed the other one. So he views that case as different from bevat achat. Now you're wondering, what's the third opinion? So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. This Beit Av said, the Tanakama said, either which way you're liable. Rabbi Yehuda said you're only liable if it happened, you did it at the same time. But Hatanya, it says in another Beit Av, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, patur bevat achat. You're exempt if you do it at the same time. Even at the same time, you're exempt. That's really radical. And it contradicts what the Beit Av said about Rabbi Yehuda. So we have two issues. Number one, how does Rabbi Yehuda say bevat achat chayav, in another case, bevat achat patur? And how does he also say this? It doesn't really make so much sense to us. So first, the Gemara doesn't really ask that question yet. But first they answer the first question, which is trei tana liable to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, we have this often where it's unclear what Rabbi Yehuda actually said. Two different tanaim, presumably in the generation after Rabbi Yehuda, debated what Rabbi Yehuda actually said. Okay, so we have a debate. Which one he said, we don't know. My time of demand patav. What's the reason for the one who says he's exempt? Rabbi Chanina, ne'emar bracha lemata v'ne'emar bracha lemala. Okay, bracha doesn't mean bracha. Bracha means klala. Okay, we see this often. It's a euphemism. We don't want to say the word klala, especially. We're going to see in a second that it means we're referring to the cursing God and also cursing your parents. We don't really want to say that. So they use the language of blessing, but what they really mean is cursing. It says in the Torah, there's two psukim by the parents and two psukim by God, how you're not allowed to curse God and you're not allowed to curse your parents. So bracha lamata is by us, the parents, our topic, and it also says bracha lamala, not by God either. So they make a comparison because the word likalel appears there and likalel appears there. They say malamala she'ein ba shutafut. When it comes to God, there's nobody else with him. There's no other option. When we say you can't curse God, it's clear we're referring to God. Okay, maybe you can't understand exactly what God is, but it's clear that we mean God. There's nobody else involved here. There's no doubt about which God he is. So therefore, when we say you can't curse your father, it has to be your father who you have definitive knowledge that this is your father. And in our case, even though you're definitely cursing your father, you don't know which one is definitely your father. So you're missing that element of definite. Actually, there's some logic to this in a psychological sense, right? If you're not sure he's really your father, then by cursing him, it's not as bad as someone you know who's definitively your father. So now they say, so therefore also here, Ema Shutafut. Now that works for the cursing. It doesn't really work for the hitting. How do we get to the hitting? Because there's no comparison, there's no isur to hit God, there is no such thing. The itkash haka'al klala, but in Sefer Shmot, in Parshat Mishpatim, where it's listed about cursing God, they're within two psukim of each other. There's one pasuk in between, but it talks about not cursing your father and it talks about not hitting it's actually both your parents. But our topic here is your father because he's the one who's unknown, but it's you can't hit your parent, you can't hit your parents, and it says you can't curse your parents. So therefore they say, because they're juxtaposed in the verse, even though again, there's a separation of one pasuk in between, but they're close enough. So we can make a hekesh from one to the other. So it's true for klala, it's true for haka'a, and therefore, according to this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, we basically say, we're going to assume that you have to know the father definitively. If you don't, even bevat achad, you curse them both at the same time, you're not liable. Okay, two more issues before we finish our chapter. Back to the Mishnah, and these are specific kohanim issues. If he wants to, he can go, and again, we explain this in a minute. We're going to change our explanation, but it sounds like if he wants, he can go work either week, right? He could go work on the week of this father's family, or he could go work on the week of that father's family. But if you remember, he doesn't get the portions that go to the kohanim that week. Whoever works gets the meat and different things from the sacrifices. He doesn't get it because they can claim, oh, go prove you're part of our family. So the Gemara says now, the structure of the Gemara right now is going to be, they're going to ask a question, they're going to say, what a ridiculous question, and then they're going to say the question must have been something else. So I want to tell you that before you hear the question, because it does sound like a bit of a strange question. If he's not going to get the portions that go to the Kohen, then why is he going to go work in the temple? What's the point, right? Now, it seems a little strange. That's not really the point. It's not to get the food. On the other hand, it's a big incentive, but still. So the Gemara says, what do you mean, lama oleh? Why does he go work in the temple? Hamar be'ena denavi mitzvah. Well, maybe he'll just say, I'd like to do a mitzvah. It's nice to work in the temple. It's clear, that's really not such a question. Now they say, okay, so this was the question. Ela Allah lo katani. The way I explained the Mishnah to you is if the word was Allah. If he went to work in this mishmar, yeah, he could work. In other words, they'll let him into the temple to work. And if he wants to go with that mishmar, they'll let him into the temple, he can do it. And that's more, you would say it in the language of Allah. If he went, right, it works. It's like what we call a b'diavad language, like post facto. Okay, if he did it, it's fine. But that's not what it says. It says ole. Ole sounds more like he should go to the temple this guy's week, and he should go to the temple that guy's week. Normally they would work 2 weeks a year, plus on the holidays. So this person who has a doubt has to work 4 times a year, ba'al korcho, even against his will, meaning we force him to go work this week and this week. To which now they ask, so why? Why is he forced to work 4 times a year? Amar Rav Acha bar Chanina, Amar Abaye, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, passed down from 4 people. Mishum pagam mishpacha. Okay, what is this? So look at Rashi. Rashi explains. Mishum pagam He's going to cause embarrassment to each family if he doesn't go work. If people don't see him going to the temple, when the whole family goes to the temple, they have to understand this person was obviously connected to one or the other family somehow, maybe even both of them. Right? We don't know exactly where he's living, but if he seems to be connected with this family in some way, and then they see that all the people go up to the temple and he doesn't, they're going to start talking about him and saying, oh, there must be something wrong with his kehuna, the fact that he's not going to the temple. And people don't like other people spreading rumors about them and talking badly about them. So therefore, we make him go to avoid what people will say. Which is interesting, right? Sometimes, you bring up your children and they say, don't worry about what other people are saying. Sometimes you have to worry about what other people are saying, right? It's always a toss-up. How much do you care what other people say and how much do you not care? But when it comes to kehuna, we don't want people just saying, oh, maybe he's got a mum, a blemish, all sorts of things. Last part for this section. Remember, if they're part of one mishmar, which means they work the same week, then he can get a portion of the gifts that go to the kohanim. So now the Gemara says that shouldn't work really either, because what's the difference between, okay, so let me, before we even go on, I see you're asking a question, Becky, and maybe before I say this next section, it should be clear. We learned about this in Yomi, that how would it work? They were split up into families. Okay, if you remember, this family went that week, this family went that week, and a family means a broad family of a bunch of families, a bunch of nuclear families. Then they would split up into Beit Av, which means heads of family within that family. So each day, each mishmar was split up. All the kohanim were split up into 24 mishmarot. Each mishmar was split up into 6. So each family, again, within the bigger family, there was the smaller families. So they would each have a day of the week. And that day they would receive the gifts. So even within the mishmar itself, there was a division of who gets every day. So that's what leads the Gemara to their next question. Why can't it be if they're in 2 different mishmarot, he can't get? Because he'll go to this one and say, I want to get some of the stuff. And they'll say, it's not your turn today. Go prove you're my brother or you're in our family, and he can't prove it. So likewise, so now they're going to say, if that's the way it is in each mishmal, well, mishmar chad nami, even within the same mishmal, Beit Av, right? Again, he could go to each Beit Av if he goes on Sunday and the other family is on Monday. It's got family number 1 is Sunday, family number 2 is Monday. They also can push him off and say, I know this is your week, but you're part of the other family. You're not part of our family. And basically, he won't be able to prove it. So, Amar Papa Hachikama. What it really means to say in the Mishnah is, only if he's part of the same mishmal and the same Beit Av. If he's not part of the same Beit Av, they can say, no, you're not getting any of the portions. Again, he still has to work because of the Pagam Mishpacha, but he doesn't get to benefit. And with that, we finished our chapter, which, I kind of think of this chapter as the riddle chapter, the crazy cases chapter, right? We saw all sorts of interesting suffix cases, right? Complicated cases. Okay, now we're going to start something totally different. We now want to understand, how does chalitza work? Now, you might have thought we'd start the Masechet with this, right? Yibum is pretty simple, okay? They have sexual relations, that's it, okay? No witnesses, no court, no, right? You do it in private, okay? That's clear. There's nothing really to discuss there. But how do you do the mitzvah of chalitza? Chalitza has a lot of strange details to it, okay? And I know that one of the things that's probably in the heads of many people that are learning this Masechet is, what's the idea behind this? Why these details? Why like this? And I have to say, it's really a challenge, okay? It's not just a challenge for you, for me, for everybody who's learning this Masechet. It's not very clear, this whole chalitza ceremony. It's quite different. We will get some inklings into certain things here, but it's still, we're going to have more questions than answers. And in fact, Geffen went out yesterday specifically on today's daf about how many judges you need and why you need a court. And, Rabbanit Shimoni said right at the beginning, we're going to have a lot more questions than answers, okay? And this is something that you have to remember about Yibum in general. First of all, it's a ceremony that isn't practiced so often, right? It doesn't happen that often. It does happen, but it's not something we're as familiar with because it doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen to most people. And it's just very out there. So we're going to get into a lot of interesting details or strange details, right? And maybe inklings into certain things, but you're going to come out with a lot more questions than answers. So just sometimes it's okay if you know that going in, and it gives you the confidence, okay, so we don't understand everything. It's kind of like para aduma, right? You don't really understand it. It's not really clear what this is, this red heifer, and why we do it, right? That's why it's in Parsha Chukat, it's a chok, right? This also is a bit of a strange thing. You can understand certain concepts. Okay, we understand the brother's supposed to continue his brother's name. That actually makes sense. But the whole chalitza ceremony is quite strange. And yes, the concept, again, if you take the broad concept, we want to embarrass this person because he's not doing something that he should be doing. Even though what's ironic is, we're going to even see this today, sometimes they convince him that he should do chalitza, right? Sometimes and there was a whole debate, do we prefer chalitza to yibum, right? So even though we want to embarrass him, on the other hand, he actually maybe is doing the right thing. And that I think is also sometimes, as society changed, chalitza became less relevant. Yibum became less relevant. Chalitza became better, and not even only in modern times, even in the times of the Gemara, we see that we had that a while ago, that there was a whole debate, maybe chalitza is preferable to yibum. With all that said, now we'll get started. Mitzvah chalitza b'shlosha dayanim. So the Mishnah starts off, classic Mishnah. How many judges do you need? 3 judges. Okay, it seems very simple from our Mishnah, but we're going to see there's a machloket about this when we get to the Gemara. They don't even need to be judges. They could even be regular people. Okay, we have this, let's say, with Hatarat Nedarim, when we annul our vows on Erev Rosh Hashanah, we do it in front of any 3 people. Okay, it doesn't have to be judges who have, experience as judges. Okay, there's certain things you need judges for. There's certain things you don't need judges for. You just need what we call a Beit Av, which could be any 3 men getting together. Well, we'll see. Does it really mean any 3 men? We'll see that soon. If she does it with a shoe as opposed to a sandal, chalitza takshera. Okay, it works. Ba'anpilia with okay, we're going to see what this anpilia is and which kind is good, which kind is bad. But right now, let's just say anpilia, which seems to be some sort of soft shoe. Chalitza tapsula. It's no good. Okay, so we're starting to get to all these details about what kind of shoe you need, and you're going to say, this is a little bit crazy, how much detail they go into, what type of shoe. Right nowadays, there's a special chalitza shoe that's in the court. We'll talk about what they do with it and how it works, but we'll get to that later. But chalitza, there's a special shoe that you use. We'll see, and it's got these straps and all sorts of other things. Okay, b'sandal sheyesh lo akev kashel. If it's a sandal, as long as it has a sole, it's fine. She'ein lo akev pasul, but if it doesn't have a sole, it's no good. Mina arkuva ulamata chalitza kshera. Rashi says, what is this talking about? Arkuva is from your knee and down, as opposed to mina arkuva ulamala chalitza psula. It's from your knee up, it's a problem. Rashi says, what are we talking about here? And he seems to be shifting topics. We're talking about someone who doesn't have a leg, whose leg is cut off either below the knee or above the knee. If the leg is cut off below the knee and he has some sort of a shoe on it, he can take off the shoe and do that. If he has his leg cut from above the knee, then it's a problem. It's a little bit weird because we're leaving this topic of shoe all of a sudden and talking more about his leg, but that's how Rashi explains the Mishnah. But however, and that's how the Gemara seems to explain it when we get to it later on Shabbos' daf, we'll get to it. But daf Kuf Gimel. But other people explain it. What we're talking about is the shoe has these straps, and if you look, I see people are quoting online. You can find all sorts of places where you can find, see about a chalitza shoe, and you can see chalitza ceremony online. Nowadays, it's so easy to search things. You can find a lot of things about it. It's about where you unstrap the shoe. It's like a sandal type thing, or a shoe that has straps, and it straps up your leg, and you undo the straps, and maybe it's referring to, do you have to undo them from under the knee and not from above the knee? Okay, so there's a debate about how to read this line. If you use someone else's shoe, or now here it seems to be the language. If you remember, we just did the last section of the last one. Was it Allah? Was it already, if you do it, this is how we relate to it. This seems to already be in the category of b'diavad, post-factum. If you did this, okay, it sounds like it's less than ideal, and we'll get to this also on Daf Kuf Gimel. But if you take off if you have a shoe that's not yours, sounds like you have to own the shoe, which is a little bit strange. What do you mean? The court has the shoe. You don't bring your own shoe. So we'll talk about that in Daf Kuf Gimel. But or if it was wood, as opposed to what? Leather, right? Because leather is generally shoe. Where do we know that from? Yom Kippur, okay? We learned from Yom Kippur, by the way. We're going to make comparisons. Shoe comes up in a few topics in the Gemara. Comes up by Yom Kippur, what shoes you're not allowed to wear, and the ilata sandal is forbidden. Comes up by Shabbat. What can you wear in the public domain that's not considered carrying? If it's a shoe, then it's not considered carrying. If it's not a shoe, then it's something unnecessary almost, and then it's carrying. It's very interesting how all these sugyot are going to connect. Chalitza bigadol. Okay, so if you do those, you use a left shoe, but you put it on your right foot, then chalitza kshera, right? Judaism always prefers the right side, so it has to be on your right foot, but even if it's the left shoe that's on your right foot, it works. Let's say the shoe's too big, right? Does the shoe fit? So if the shoe's too big, but you can still walk in it, right? There's a difference between a shoe that's too big that you can't walk in and a shoe that's too big that you can walk in. Or a shoe that's too small, but it still covers the majority of your foot. Chalitza kshera, and the chalitza works. So now we start with the Gemara. And the Gemara is going to start with this first line. And they ask a very good classic Gemara question. If already 3 hadyotot is fine, then why does it have to say dayanim and even regular people? It should have just said you need 3 hadyotot. Why mention dayanim? Doesn't really belong here. To teach you that you can't just take any hadyotot, any regular people. They have to be people that can read. Why do they need to read? Because part of the ceremony is they're supposed to tell the person what they're supposed to say. There's a text, it's a special text. There's certain places in the Torah, not very many, where the Torah says, when you do this ceremony, this is what needs to be said. So the people in the court need to help the people say what they're supposed to say. So they need to be able to read to be able to do that. You see that not everybody read in those days. Not everybody was literate, which makes sense. And therefore, you have to make sure there are people who can. Tanina lahad tanu Rabbanan. We're going to now have a bright to the proofs, what we just saw. Mitzvah chalitza b'shlosha sheyodim lahakot ke'ein dayanim. Okay, there you have it. It has to be 3. You can read like dayanim. That proves our reading that we just tried to read of our mission. But we're going to have another thing in this bright, which is going to cause a whole big issue, whole big to do. Rabbi Yehuda omer b'chamisha. He says you need 5 judges. So now we want to know why 5, why 3. We're going to now start a ping pong between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, how they read the verses. And this is going to take us for a while. So here starts. My time in Tanakama. What's the reason? Tanya, it says in the Braitas, Kenim Shnayim. So the pasuk says, okay, we're in Devarim chapter 25, verse 7. If he doesn't want to take his Yevamot, okay, the Yevamot should go to this Kenim. What is Kenim? Plural, the elders, so it must be 2. Okay, so it's Kenim Shnayim. Vein Beitin Shakul, you never have an equal Beitin. Mosifim Aleim Od Echad, you need another one. Harei Kan Shlosha. Okay, and Gefet this week, I recommend you listen. I don't want to give it all away. Quote a Tosfot here. Why do you need 3 here? What do you need 3 for in general when you're deciding judgment? And he says guilty and he says innocent, and then you need the third one to, you don't have that here. And we do have cases where Beit Din is sometimes 2. We're even going to see it later today. So you don't always need Beit Din Shakul. Why do you need it here? So you'll have to listen to Gefet to see what Tosfot's answer is. I'm going to leave you up in the air, or you can read it yourself on the staff. Ein Beit Din Shakul. Anyway, it's a very interesting Tosfot because it's a little bit surprising what he says. Okay, next, for Rabbi Yehuda, so how does he get to 5? Ziknei Shnayim. Well, the next pasuk says, "V'kavu lo ziknei iro." The zkenim of his city call him. Now, notice it doesn't say zkenim; it says ziknei, which is the same as zkenim, but it's what you call smichud in Hebrew. The zkenim of the city. So you drop the mem, but it's a bit of a different word. So they say, zkenim, zkenei. That's 2. That's 2. You get to 4. And then obviously you have to add one more because ein Beit Din Shakul, it's not equal. Mosifim aleim Od Echad, we add another. Harei Kan Chamishan, that's how he gets to 5. The Tanakama, now we're going to start our ping pong. Hai zkenei ma'avidle. What does he do with zkenei? Mibaile l'rabuya afilu shlosha hadyotot. The zkenei there comes to teach you even regular people, because zkenim usually means elders, judges. So the second kehuna comes to tell you even regular people. Now we're going to have to ask in this ping pong, well, where does Rabbi Yehuda learn hedyotot? The Rabbi Yehuda hedyotot minale. This is going to be a little more long-winded, okay, but I'll read it and then we'll explain. Nafkale mi le'ene. It says, okay, the next verse I've been reading in order. So the first verse was, if he doesn't want to do it, then, right, they go to the gates, go to the judges, this kohanim. She says, he doesn't want to do evil with me. Then they call the Ziknei Yiro, call him. They speak to him, which we don't yet know what they speak to him about. We'll get to that later today. He says, I'm not interested. And then she goes to the man in front of the eyes of this kohanim. Okay, that's the word we're going to darshan right now. She takes off the shoe, off his foot, yarka b'fanav, she spits in his face, or in front of him. Get to that another time, but Antava Amran, and she says, this is what we do to a man. Yeah. Now we want to learn from this word la'ene that you can do hedyota. We're not there yet. La'ene means, according to this Breita, they have to see, which means can't be blind. Okay, the judges in this situation can't be blind. Now, from there you can learn it's even regular people. Why? We don't yet know. Maybe you do know this, but and if you need actual judges, well, you don't need to get rid of blind people. You don't need to have special drasha to say no one who's blind, because we already learned that no judges can be blind. Titane Rav Yosef, as Rav Yosef brought a Breita that says, just like they have to be upright, righteous people who don't have any, right? When you think about when you try to appoint someone to the Supreme Court, right? We check into their background. You do a serious background check into their how upright citizens they are and that they've never had anything to do with perversion of justice. Also, they have to be menukim mikol mum. They can't have any sort of blemish. And here specifically, the blemish of blindness is very important in the court, right? You can see because you're blemished when you can't see, you can't read faces and see. And this just came up in our house. We were on a really long security line this week, and in the airport, and we were saying how crazy it is. It takes so long to get through security in the airport. And how one day, I have a daughter studying electrical engineering, so she's talking about all these new technologies and everything, and one day it'll be much quicker and they'll have all these technologies. And then someone else in the house said, no, I think they do it long because they want to have time to look at people and see how they react online and to be able to really check people and get a sense besides just of their bags, but also of their how they look, if they're looking nervous, that there's something to that. I don't know if it's true, but it was an interesting theory to making it somewhat long so that the security people have time to really check people out. So it's the same idea here about the judge. The judge has to look at when you say something, it's not just hearing, it's also, now you could claim maybe they have really good hearing and they can hear by the way you speak, but you can see how sight would be important. Where do we get this from? Well, it's not really where we get it from because we get it from the Torah, le'ene, okay? But they're going to say, actually, no, we get it. The idea that judges can't be, right, is a Torah law. They can't be blind. But they connect it to this verse in Shiur Shiurim, Shene'emal, and there's this bunch of verses in Shiur Shiurim in this chapter, in chapter 4, that are connected to judges. So even though it's talking about this beautiful woman, it's an allegory for judges. Kulach yafer hayati, you're all entirely beautiful. Mum embach. So yafa is the issue of the justice, and mum embach is the issue of the blindness. Okay, so they basically say, so what's the connection to the hedyotot? Well, if it's judges, then we know that judges can't be blind. So you wouldn't need a special drashat to say, la'ene, this has to be done in front of judges that aren't blind. We already know no judges can be blind. From there, you must be able to infer. This is where Rabbi Yehuda gets hedyotot. So again, the rabbis learned hedyotot from skene, which was the word that Rabbi Yehuda used to teach an extra 2 judges, which is where he got to 5. Rabbi Yehuda learns hedyotot from the la'ene, but we're going to reject this. Okay, why? So first they're going to say the idach. So what's Tanakama going to do with this word la'ene? He doesn't need it for the hedyotot. So hahu la'ene my avidle. What does he do with it? Hahu lechederava hudat. He needs it for what Rava says. The Amarava Sricha dayane lemichse roka de kanafesh mipuma di Yevam. Dichtiv leines kenim biyarka. Remember in that pasuk it said, she goes in front of the eyes of this kenim. She takes off his shoe, and then she spits in front of him. So now they say, that means they have to see the saliva coming out of her mouth, right? It's not so easy to see it. That's what you need the le'ene, because it's see-through. So we're going to basically say that's what the le'ene is. Yeah, they have to see that. That's what Rava said. So that must be what Tana Kama darshans. To which they're going to go back to Rabbi Yehuda and say, wait, where are you going to learn that from? If you need le'ene to teach you hedyotot, then where are you going to learn le'ene from? Where are you going to learn this other halacha from? He also needs it to teach what Rava said. So they say, Inachinami, you're right. And they erase that as their answer for hedyotot. Le'ene doesn't come to teach you prabasumim. It doesn't come to teach them, therefore, then teach you hedyotot. No, that's not it. So we need a different answer for Rabbi Yehuda for where he learns hedyotot from. Ela hedyotot minale. Where does he learn that regular people can function as a beit din here? Nafkami bi Yisrael. Yisrael called who? The word bi Yisrael comes in there. We'll read it in a minute because it's important to see how he does this drasha. It's not so clear cut. And from Yisrael, we learn any Yisrael. So what's the pasuk? Now we're in pasuk 9 in that chapter. Remember, she goes to them. I'm sorry, I'm wrong pasuk. It's pasuk zayin. Okay. He doesn't want to do yibum. She goes to the elders. She says, my Yabam doesn't want to keep his brother's name going in the Jewish people. That's the word, in Yisrael. Lo avayibni, he's not interested. Now, the word there is clearly not referring to the judges. It's referring to he doesn't want to keep his name going within the Jewish people. But the way they read the verse here for the drasha is what we call mikra mesulas, where you kind of move words around from place to place, okay? So now let's read the pasuk from the beginning. If he's not interested, to take his yivama, skip the next words, and then she says, no, he doesn't want to. Elas kenim be Yisrael, okay, that the word Yisrael is connected to define this kenim in Yisrael. Oh, once we say it's kenim in Yisrael, then we can say, oh, that means anyone in Yisrael. Okay, that's how the drasha works. So sometimes it's important, you don't just say, oh, the word Yisrael, you have to think about how they do the drasha actually. It doesn't really work so well. V'idach, okay, so now we go back to Tana Kama. We're in our ping pong game. Hayis bi Yisrael my avilei. What do they do with this word bi Yisrael? Because they don't need it for hedyotot. We already learned that from the other proof. There's kene. So mebayle lechedetane Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. Remember that Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said this. We're going to come back to it at the end of today's daf. Bi Yisrael, which teaches you bebeitin shel Yisrael v'lo bebeitin shel gerim. Has to be Jews. It can't be converts. Converts can't function on a court for chalitza. We'll get back to that topic later. Ve'idach. Okay, so now where's Rabbi Yehuda going to darshan this? B'Yisrael achrin aktiv. Oh, B'Yisrael appears twice. Okay, where does it appear? It also appears v'nikra shmo b'Yisrael in verse 10. Nikra shmo b'Yisrael beit chalitza nal. His name within Israel will be called beit chalitza nal. From there, they learn B'Yisrael means it has to be a court of Yisraelim, born Jews and not converts. Ve'idach mebayle lechidetanya. Wait a minute. So now where's, right? What's he going to do with this extra Yisrael, the Tana Kama? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Pam ayinu yoshvim lifnei Rabbi Tarfon, uvat yivama lachlotz, ve'amar lanu anu kochem chalutz hanal. They're going to say, that's to teach you. And it says, ve'nikra shemo bi Yisrael. It's to teach you this halacha that Rabbi Tarfon told Rabbi Yehuda when he was sitting in front of him. He said, when the Yevamot came to do chalitza, everybody has to say the words chalutz hanal. That's Beit Yisrael. The people around all have to say chalutz hanal. Okay, it's like an incantation or something. V'idach, where's Rabbi Yehuda going to learn this from? V'nikra nafka, because it says v'nikra shmo b'Yisrael, right? V'nikra, not the Yisrael part. Yisrael we need for the other drasha. But nikra comes to teach you, and it'll be called by who? Called by the people that are standing there. And then Yisrael is free to teach about the converts. Elameata. So then they say, okay, now we have an issue with both of them. Okay, we're done with the back and forth, the ping pong. But now, if you're going to say that the words kene comes to include two, and the words kenim comes to include two, okay, and that's Rabbi Yehuda, or according to the rabbis, just kenim says two. It's a little bit of a strange question, but they say, elamei ata, from here you could say vikahu shnayim, vidabru shnayim. If you remember that, it's a bit of a strange pasuk. In pasuk ched, it says, after the woman comes, right, and she said, right, if he doesn't want to do it, the woman comes and says, listen, he doesn't want to do yibum. They call him, they speak to him, and then he says, lo chapatzu v'kachtana. What's a little strange? Why do we have to know that they called him? Why do they have to call him? And what do they say to him? It doesn't say what they speak to him about. So we're going to now say, so those words seem kind of unnecessary. It must be, karu is plural, again, shows you another two judges, and dabru is plural, another two judges. So if you're going to say every time it says kinim, it adds another two, so why don't you say, even according to the rabbis, if just the word kinim means two, this should also mean two and another two. So you would end up with hachinami, Rabbi Yehuda, hare kan tisha, you should have 9 because we added just another 4. Rabbanan, hare kan shiva, even to the rabbis, you would add another 4 and you'd end up with 7. Why don't we say that? Say, those words are needed for something else. For the following bright. Vikarulo velo shluchan. They have to call them himself. When the Yevamot comes to the gate and says to the kenim, he won't do yibum, they go and call him themselves. Usually they would send messengers. This they have to do themselves. Again, more details, but we don't really know why. V'dabrei, they speak to him. This is a very, really interesting line. Milamed shemisi'in lo etzah hogenet lo. V'dabru means they have a conversation with him. And the conversation, why doesn't it say exactly what? Because it's going to differ depending on who the person is. They look at the situation, they assess, and they say, listen, you don't want to do yibum. They try to think, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. So they say to him, Omrim lo, she'im hayahu yeled, if he was very young, v'his kenan, she was very old, or hu zaken v'hi yalda, he was much older than she was. Omrim lo, what are you doing with such a young woman? What are you doing with someone so much older than you? Go marry someone of your own age. You're just going to end up with strife in your house. Not to say that any marriage of people with a huge age gap is not going to be successful, but sometimes, right, it's not appropriate. So basically what they say is they assess the situation, right? Remember we had all those Gemaras about, is yibum better? Is it better to do chalitza, right? This one's saying it really depends on the situation. And the rabbis, the dayanim, or whoever these people are, get involved. And now you see why they need to read, not just because they need to tell them what the text is they're supposed to say, but they need to be intelligent people. The assumption was if they were reading, we assumed they were more intelligent. And therefore, they need to come and get involved and give him advice. What's the best scenario for you to do? And try to encourage him. Maybe it's better to do yibum. Maybe it's better to do chalitza, right? They're picking one particular issue, but I'm sure there's a lot more issues, right? But maybe the relationship they have between them, how well they got along, how well they didn't get. Very interesting. What I like about it is, right, sometimes halacha is very cut and dry, black, white. This is very gray, right? It really depends on the situation, which the pasuk really leaves open. They speak to him. What do they say? Well, it really depends. Halacha chalitza b'shlosha ho'ilu stam lan kavate. So we have this machloket. Is it 3? Is it 5? And now they say, well, chalitza with 3, because the Mishnah, stam lan kavate, it just appeared as a stam Mishnah, okay? Meaning, our Mishnah had no opinion attached to it. It just said, chalitza v'shlosha. Now, we found a braita where there was a machloket, 3 or 5, but from the stam Mishnah, we can learn 3. Amale Rava le Rav Nachman, hachi miunami. So now they say, second, if that's the second, I just realized my mic wasn't in. I was using a different mic. Okay, fix that. Amalei Rava le Rav Nachman. So Rava quotes in the name of Rav Nachman, but now he says, Ihachi miunami. Do you want to say the same thing about miun? Remember miun. Woman gets married off by her mother or brother, and she can say, I refuse to be married to you right around age 12. So now, miunami ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, hamiun v'ali chalitza b'shlosha. It says in the Mishnah that miun and chalitza are done with 3 people. So those 2 things are put together. So if we hold chalitza with 3, we must hold miun with 3. And if you want to say, yeah, okay, so what's the big deal? Yeah, say miun with 3. But It says in a Braita, Vatanya, mi'un. Now we're going to see a few different things about mi'un. Beit Shammai omrim, Beit Mumchi. Shammai says to do mi'un, you have to do it in front of a court with 3 experts. Beit Hillel omrim, bebeitim v'shelo bebeitim. Well, you could use judges or you could use regular people. Elu ve'elu modim shetzarich shlosha. But they both admit that you need 3. So far, so good. But Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yossi, machshirim b'shnayim. They say you could do mi'un in front of 2 people only. Amar Rav Yosef Bar Yomi, Amar Rav Nachman, which is the person we're talking to, Rav Nachman here. Halacha ke'oto azug. We paskin like that couple, meaning the second people that said you only need 2, which means that we don't hold by mi'un 3. So why by chalitza we hold 3 and mi'un we don't? Hatam chad stama hachat trei stame. There was only one stam mishnah, the one we quoted, Hamiyun v'chalitza b'shlosha. That, by the way, is a mishnah in Sanhedrin, which lists what do you need a court for 3? What do you need? Sometimes 7, sometimes all different numbers, 23, 71. Okay, so there it just said chalitza miyun. But our mishnah is a second one, so it's a numbers game. 2 stam mishnahs like for chalitza 3, only 1 stam mishnah for miyun, and that's why. If you're not convinced by this, don't worry, the Gemara won't be convinced by this either. Then the Gemara says, Hatam nami tres stamineni. There's also 2 stam mishnahs that say miyun b'shlosha. Ditnan says in another mishnah, mi'ana o shachatza b'fanav yisa'ena mipnei shehu bebeiti. Okay, we learned this before on Daf Kafei. I believe this is the sugya on Daf Kafei. Yes. So it said, if she is mima'en in front of him, she says, I don't want to be married to you, or chatza, or she does chalitza in front of a particular judge. He was sitting on the court. Yisa'ena. Even though he sat on the court and was involved in the case, he's allowed to marry her. Why? Because he's part of a court of 2 other people, it seems, right? So because of that, we don't think, right, if it was just him, we wouldn't trust him, right? Maybe you were doing it just to marry her. But since he himself is functioning as part of a court, so here you see another Stam Mishnah that holds like that miyun is 3. So we now have 2 Mishnahs also for miyun. Well, now they say, okay, if you're playing a numbers game, we'll play a numbers game. Notice that Mishnah talked about chalitza and miyun. So now, alahatam trei stami, there's 2 stams by miyun, and hachat tlata stami. By us, there's 3 stam Mishnahs, the one on Kafhei, our Mishnah, and the one in Sanhedrin. So that's why. So then the Gemara says, what kind of a claim are you making? Why, if you go by stam Mishnah, what does it matter if we have 1 stam Mishnah, 2 stam Mishnahs, 3 stam Mishnahs? A stam Mishnah is a Mishnah that appears without a machloket. And it seems usually when we have a stam Mishnah, that's the halacha. So what does it matter? 1, 2, 3, you already got 2. Why would you need more? So we're still trying to figure out why, if miyun appears in a stam Mishnah twice already, that you need 3, why do we paskin 2? As opposed to chalitza, where we paskin 3. So we go up with a different answer now. It appears somewhere else as a stam, in our case, chalitza. Why specifically do we hold chalitza as 3? Because it appears in another place with a machloket, but it appears as a stam. What on earth does that mean? We're going to see right now. It says in the Mishnah, smichat zkenim ve'egla arufa. This is also in Sanhedrin. Bishlosha, divrei Rabbi Yossi. When it comes to giving smicha to rabbis, egla arufa. Okay, smicha rabbi is a little different than nowadays, but we'll just go with that. And egla arufa is bishlosha, divrei Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda omer b'chamisha. On those issues, there's a machloket, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. That's the machloket. But right after that, it says chalitza v'miyunim bishlosha. And notice, lo kapalig Rabbi Yehuda, he doesn't appear there. He appears arguing about a different case, but he doesn't appear arguing here, even though by us he says 5. Why doesn't he appear here? It must be Shmamina Hadrabe Rabbi Yehuda Shmamina. It must be Rabbi Yehuda changed his mind. And therefore, we hold 3 by chalitza. And we think we're done with this topic, but we're not. But we're moving on to something else for a minute. Not only do we need dayanim, they need to set aside a place. How do we know this? She goes to the gate, to the skenim. It seems like they have to have a designated place. Rav Papa, so now we thought we were done. Clearly you need 3 dayanim. However, we're going to now have a bunch of situations that happen where they required 5 dayanim. We're going to have to see why. Rav Papa, Rav Huna Bered, Rav Yoshua, Avdei Uvada b'chamisha. They did a chalitza, an uvad as a maaseh. They did a maaseh, an actual case, with 5. Kiman, according to Rabbi Yehuda, v'hadarbe. Well, they were holding a Rabbi Yehuda, but we just said Rabbi Yehuda changed his mind. Lipirsume milta. They wanted to lefarsem. They wanted everybody to know. Rashi says, why do we need everybody to know? And by the way, one of the big questions that Rabbanit Shimoni asked today is, why do we not need by get? Okay, and you're going to see the two reasons, and it would be relevant for get as well. Rashi says, milta, we want to make sure everybody knows she's a chalutza, so she doesn't marry a kohen. Number two, we also want people to marry her. We want to help this woman get married. One of those big shidduch crisis, right? This woman, all the more so, she's a chalutza. We want to make sure she can get married again. We want everybody to know she's out there. So why this wouldn't be true for get is a very good question. Okay, there's some possible answers, but I'm going to leave it as an open question. You can think about it. Why get can be done just between nowadays we do it in a court, but in those days they didn't do it in a court. He would just hand her the get and she'd be divorced. So it's a good question. And someone from the last class in Hebrew claimed that maybe it's because she has a get in hand. It's interesting because nowadays they tear the get. It's true they write it down in the courts, and nowadays we do it in court, but maybe she has something to show for it. Anyway, it's a very good question. Rav Ashi ikla lebe Rav Kahan. So Rav Ashi goes to the house of Rav Kahana and says, I need you for a court to get to 5. Amar Rav Kahana, I was in front of Rav Yehuda, come to this area where these reeds are. Apparently that's where they did the court to join us for 5. He says to him, why don't we need 5? Again, we have this, we want to publicize it. Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, I told you we come back to him. He was in front of Rav Yehuda. He said to him, come right to this place. We're going to do the chalitza. Amar le tanina. Remember what he said before? Tanina bebeitin Yisrael, bebeitin Yisrael, v'lo bebeitin shel gerim. He says I can't do chalitza because it says specifically Yisrael and not gerim. And I'm a convert. Now you look at his sentence in a very different light. You thought he was being excluding gerim, but he himself is a ger, right? And he said he was the one who darshan this. Gerim can't be involved here. Amar Rav Yehuda, kigon Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. He says now about Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, he's such a great person. Mafikna mamona apume. I would take money out of someone's hands based on his testimony. To which the Gemara says, Mafikna salkadatak. What are you talking about? You need 2 witnesses to take money out of someone's hand. You can't just say this guy's so great. What, I'll take him as if he's 2 witnesses? No, ela marana shtara apume. If he says the shtar is valid and there's 2 witnesses on the shtar, meaning he could be a good judge. Like I would accept his assessment of a situation where there's witnesses signed on a document, but I would trust him. And this is something, by the way, when it comes to converts, they can function on a court of dinei mamonot. There's questions about other types of courts. Can they function on the court? There's an interesting question about a court of converts. You need to convert in front of a beit. Can you use converts for that or not? Very interesting question. Anyway, this opens up a whole interesting topic about converts. We've had a lot about converts within our Masechet. That seems to be the main sugyot about conversion. Many of them are found in Yevamot. Okay, with that, we'll finish our daf for today. Have a great day, everyone.